Good morning, lovelies! Today we are going to talk about 5 overused queer tropes and cliches that are found all over science fiction and fantasy. Much like my queer rep in horror video, I'm going to be using the word queer in a reclamatory fashion. The haters don't get to use it anymore. It is ours now. And we're going to be using it as an umbrella term for anyone who is not cishet. So if that's a trigger word for you, I would recommend you watch a different video. In fact, watch this one. It's about the book I have coming out in like a year and a half. Before we get into the tropes, one very quick housekeeping note. You may have noticed my fabulous new t-shirt. It's also got some writing on the back too. The Good Morning Lovelies t-shirt is available as a women's and unisex tee, as well as a long sleeve shirt in my merch store. It is linked in the description, and patrons in the $10 tier and up get a 10% off discount code their final purchase anytime they enter the store. You can find both the Patreon link and the t-shirt link in the description below. Alright, enough about that. Let's talk about queer characters and 5 of the most infuriating ways that they are portrayed in science fiction and fantasy. Number 1, queer baiting. Queer baiting is when writers hint at an LGBTQ plus character, or more specifically a same-sex relationship, and then just never deliver on it. Supernatural embodies this with Dean and Castiel. John and Sherlock spend almost every single episode of their show either flirting or bickering like an old married couple. Finn and Poe, I mean, there are hundreds more. So it's less of a queer stereotype and more of a Schrodinger's gay. Like, are these characters gay or not? Will they actually get to be in a relationship together? Who knows? The writers sure don't. This is what happens when storytellers, and especially filmmakers, try to attract 2 very different audiences. The queer and queer-friendly audience, and the homophobic audience. If you're a writer, you've probably had it drilled into your head that you want to target a very specific audience, and for good reason. Not everybody is going to like your work, so you want to be laser focused on appealing to the type of person who is most likely to want to buy and consume your product. Otherwise, trying to include a sweet high school romance with an adult grimdarky thriller is going to cause a tonal clash, and the work is going to suffer because of it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very unlikely to work. It's essentially the worst of both worlds, and while the homophobic audience won't mind, at least until they see the internet fan art, the queer and queer-friendly audience definitely will. So in a way, you are choosing your audience. Just probably not the one you were hoping for. Now, queer baiting isn't always bad. Sometimes it's the only way for a filmmaker to get any type of queer representation in their work. Back in the 1930s, America had what was called the Hays Codes, a set of laws that determined what Hollywood could and could not include in their movies. Queer characters were in the not category. If they did appear, they had to be explicitly evil and punished for their sin. But particularly clever filmmakers were able to slip some queer-coded characters into their movies, defining a lot of the modern-day stereotypes we have about queer people today. Now, while we no longer have the Hays Code, we do have a global economy that depends largely on people in foreign countries buying and consuming American media. And a lot of those countries have very draconian laws about what their people can and cannot buy. The governments are run by homophobic jackasses, basically. And I hate it, especially since there's not a whole lot we can do about it. Filmmakers basically have to choose between making more money and including explicitly queer characters, and most of them are going to listen to their wallet. And on that cheerful note, number 2, bury your gays. This is when you kill off every single LGBTQ plus character and or their same-sex relationship status in the story. It's almost seen as a safer option. You're not queer baiting because this character is explicitly bisexual, or these 2 men are definitely undeniably dating in your story. But you don't want their queerness to distract from the story, so we'll just kill them off early on. Guys, no, this is not positive representation. This is the same bullshit that we've been dealing with for centuries. It's almost a joke in the queer media. Like how, the black guy dies first in a horror movie, or at least will not be making it to the 3rd act. We know that our character probably is not going to make it to the end either. There are exceptions, of course, But the fact that there are exceptions kind of proves that there's a rule here. Now, I'll admit guilt on this one. I wrote a story called Homestead Hunts. It was part of the Earth's Final Chapter series. This whole international thing is written by a ton of writers and illustrators. It's an illustrated novella series. We're from all around the world. It's a really great project. And this was one of my first major pieces of published writing. And one of the main characters is a lesbian. She was in a relationship with another woman. They were going to move in together. And then to establish stakes and kind of inform the reader that, you know, nobody is safe. Even the major character can be affected by this. I killed off one of those characters. And then I realized afterwards that, oh shit, even though I left one of those girls alive, that's still a barrier gaze thing because she's not allowed to be happy in a relationship. Whereas I had the start of another romantic relationship going on between two straight characters, and that's kind of implying that these two are going to get a happy ending together. But this lesbian definitely isn't. Now, the good news is I left the story on enough of a cliffhanger, and I wrote it well enough that the editor/publisher was just like, so you want to come back and write more for us? And I was just like, sure. And Iron Oracle, which is the sequel to Homestead Hunts, is going to come out in 2023, 2024, I think. I'm honestly not sure. It's a small company. They take a while to do a lot of stuff. But anyway, that one I'm able to kind of retroactively fix some of those old mistakes. It happens. Writers are going to fumble now and again. And for the record, I am not saying that writers should never kill off queer characters. Giving any character plot armor for any reason kills the tension in the story. But you should give at least one of your queer characters a happy ending. Sarah Fear is hanged by her 17th century sound, essentially because she's a woman and a lesbian, and she's taken the fall for a crime that she did not commit in order to save her girlfriend's life. The girlfriend is obviously heartbroken, she feels guilty, and the last we see of her is her and her friends digging up Sarah's body to give her a proper funeral somewhere else. It's a tragedy, and it's one that's written very well. But the main character, Dina, gets to save her girlfriend, Sam, and the last we see of them is going on this sweet little date together. So the trilogy avoids burying its gays by burying only one gay. Twice, technically, and letting the other two walk into the sunset together. Alright, number 3, the arrow ace villain who cannot understand love. Stop me if you've heard this one before. So the villain has captured one of the heroes and is torturing them, taunting them with the fact that their friends will never come to save them. Only then the friends do come to save them, and then the villain has this whole breakdown because what is this thing you call love? Fucking kill me now. These villains are never explicitly stated to be arrow ace, but they're definitely coded as such. They never experience, or at least express, romantic or sexual attraction, which is the definition of aromantic asexual. Any romance or sex that they do engage in is purely to manipulate the people around them. As your local aromantic asexual, I have a few problems with this trope. Number 1, there is more than one kind of love. Romantic, yes, but also platonic, familial, general compassion for your fellow humans, love of pets. I mean, the list goes on. And while the villain obviously doesn't understand any type of concept of love, the writer will often only use romantic love as the one thing separating the hero from the villain. And these stories often have literally every single character be in a romantic relationship except for the villain, even when the story could really benefit from cutting out like 3 or 4 of those relationships. That's called pairing the spares, where literally every single character gets hooked up with another character, except for the villain. Because only a villain would never want a romantic relationship. Which leads me to my next point. It further feeds the idea that arrow ace people aren't fully human. That we're missing some fundamental piece of our humanity or happiness or just life in general until we've managed to land a romance with someone else and make it last for a couple of decades. Because if you don't experience romantic attraction or want anything to do with romance in general, then obviously there's something wrong with you and you're probably just one of those cold-hearted villains. I want to make something very clear here. If you're aromantic and or asexual or somewhere under those two umbrellas, there is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing that is missing, and Hollywood is full of shit. Go watch Moana and Zootopia until you feel better. Number 4, the arrow ace robot. For aro-ace people, often the only positive representation that we get to see on screen or in stories is with robots. I'm talking explicit representation here. I mean, I mentioned Moana and Zootopia earlier as almost like a joke, but none of those characters ever say, I don't feel romantic or sexual attraction, or I don't get that, or I don't really want that. Their stories just don't happen to include a romantic subplot. Which is fine. I mean, I love stories that do that. Honestly, we need more. I mean, even Aloe's lives don't spend every minute of every day revolving around romance and sex. You guys gotta take a break eventually, right? But we definitely need more human characters who are aromantic and or asexual. And there aren't a whole lot of them, especially in sci-fi fantasy, because that part can just be played by a robot, who obviously doesn't feel romantic or sexual attraction because those things are fundamentally human, and if you take those away, then you don't get an aro-ace person, you get something closer to a robot. In terms of human aro-ace representation, we got Catherine in Justina Ireland's Dread Nation series. It's fantastic, you should read that. We've got Lynn in Lippa Bre's Diviner series, that was not bad. And I wrote one in Citadel, which comes out in 2023. It's a minor character because I didn't want the main character who is autistic to be aro-ace, because they already have that stereotype. And that's it. That's all I know. Making the only explicitly aro-ace character a robot is just as harmful as making the villain the only aro-ace character for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier. It sends the message that a lack of sexual and or romantic attraction is inherently inhuman, and it's not. This is especially frustrating when the robot's whole narrative arc revolves around them wanting to be human so they can experience love. Like, that's the whole point of them wanting to be human, is to bone. And number 5, the non-binary non-humans. This one's going to take a little bit of explaining because not everyone knows what non-binary really means. So if you do know what that means, bear with me, please. But non-binary is an umbrella term that covers any and all gender identity that is not, strictly speaking, just man or woman. It's like the asexual umbrella. It is both itself a queer identity and an umbrella term for a bunch of other identities. And this umbrella includes but is not limited to people who have no gender identity, people whose gender identity changes over time, people with both feminine and masculine attributes to their identity, people with like culturally specific gender identities, people with an identity somewhere in between man and woman, and my roommate, who I sincerely hope is watching this video because guess whose turn it is to do the dishes. Now, a non-binary gender is not to be confused with intersex, which is when someone is born with genitalia that is both male and female. Those are two different things. Sex, gender are very distinct and different. Anyway, recently media has done this thing where they will have a non-binary character, which is great, but that character will not be human. Because, oh my god, it's not like there are any human non-binary people out in the world, right? I mean, that would just be awkward. Non-binary, non-human characters are all over the place. Janet from The Good Place has almost a catchphrase, not a girl, because she is an artificial intelligence who does not have a gender identity, despite all the dresses and feminine appearance. You got Double Trouble from She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. I mean, hell, we've even got Loki officially on this list thanks to a blink and you miss it look at his paperwork from the show. And this would not be that much of an issue if non-binary representation was not already razor thin. And at this point, I would argue, the vast majority of that razor-thin representation is now non-human. Similar to how the media has been portraying aro-ace people, the literal dehumanization of non-binary characters others them. It makes them seem as something separate, weird, not fully human. And audiences carry that attitude and that stigmatization after they put the book down or leave the movie theater. So that's a fun place to leave the video on. Let's wrap up. Obviously, there are more queer tropes in science fiction and fantasy. Please list your biggest frustration in the comments below. And be sure to check out the merch store so you can treat yourself to an early Christmas present. I will see you next time. Bye, lovelies!